Welcome, everyone. I'm Suzanne Strasser, and I'll be your moderator for this session. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, CMMC is now law, what the 48 CFR rule means for your contracts. With me today are two experts. I was going to say seasoned, but I'll say experts who have been guiding defense contractors through CMMC compliance since the program began. Scott Dawson, President of Core Business Solutions, and Rick Crick, Senior Cybersecurity Consultant and CMMC Lead here as well. As of November 10th, 2025, the 48 CFR rule, sometimes called the CMMC contract rule, officially takes effect. This means CMMC has transitioned from policy to law, written directly into the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, or DFARS, as we all know it. From now on, CMMC certification is not optional. It's a condition of award for DoD contracts. Over the next hour, we'll cover the legal shift, making CMMC a binding contract requirement, the four-phase rollout timeline from 2025 to 2028, prime and subcontractor responsibilities under the new rule, the current readiness gap across the defense industrial base, how to stay continuously compliant once certified. Scott and Rick will share practical insights and examples, as always, including how small contractors are using secure CUI enclaves like the Core Vault to meet requirements efficiently without overhauling their entire network. So let's start with how the 48 CFR rule officially became a legal requirement in CMMC land. So we've talked, for years now, it seems, about CMMC as a program in progress, but that has now changed. So with the final 48 CFR rule now in place, CMMC has moved from policy guidance to enforceable law. So Scott, can you start by walking us through what in CMMC has changed and what this means for contractors in practical terms?
Yeah, and the way you introduced all this made me remember I had a full head of hair and 20 pounds lighter when all this started.
Yeah, it seems like it's a while ago.
It was a while ago, and I think a lot of us didn't think this day would come when the government was able to start to roll out the requirement. That doesn't mean the risk has gone away. Doesn't mean the threat to our nation isn't gone or is gone. It just means that all the logistics are, dealt with, and now we have to get certified. We have to get, companies have to be certified. So, but on September 10th, as you alluded to, the DoD finalized 48 CFR, which is the DFARS rule, that embeds CMMC into acquisition regulations. So what that does is it tells procurement officers and others who are developing contract requirements, they authorizes them to put the requirement into the contract and make it binding as a legal obligation for contractors. So until now, it hasn't been legally binding. Now it is legally binding if it's in a contract and when it lands in your contract. I guess that's a better way to say that. The 32 CFR rule, which has been out for about a year, was the program rule, and that defined the structure of CMMC and how you get certified. It was kind of but it didn't say, now we're going to start, because that's the role of 48 CFR, the contract rule. And so it defines how things are going to be implemented. And they're updating new clauses. One is 252, 204, 7021. We saw a draft of that when CMMC 1.0 came out. But that has been revised, as has 252, 204, 7025, requires a current CMMC status before award. So they're just laying out, from a regulation point of view, all the steps and what we're accountable to meet with DoD contracts. So contracting officers will jump into the SPRS database we've been talking about for how long, and they are going to look up the UID, the identification number, the tracking number that identifies your business and the scope of your network that's certified, and they are going to check to see that you're certified before they could award a contract to you. So the mechanics are there, the systems are there. And so this applies to all contractors and subs, anywhere in the supply chain, whether you're handling FCI or CUI. Different levels of certification required, but no matter what kind of documentation you're handling, there is a requirement. With an exception, and that is COTS, the commercial off-the-shelf products. You won't see these requirements in those contracts. It's just not. It's not relevant there. So, but the practical impact is the proposals have to line up the scope, the systems, the certifications. All that has to be up front, and there's no more certify later path. That path is closed to all traffic at this point. So it's certify now, not certify later.
Okay. All right. Well, Scott, you just outlined how the rule formalizes CMMC under DFARS. Rick, let's talk to you about the mechanics. So the rule introduces affirming officials, UIDs, and annual affirmations. Can you explain what those mean for contractors day to day?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Let's start with the affirming officials, if you will. Another way to say that is someone from top management needs to take responsibility and affirming that anything that you put into the SPRS database, that's Supplier Performance Risk System, where EMAS is, that any information that you put in there is accurate, and they're attesting to that information is correct and up to date. Just mentioning a little bit here about the UID, the unique identifier, part of EMAS. So when you enter your information into the SPRS database, part of that information is that UID, that unique identifier that Scott mentioned, that helps track where you are in this process. And it's going to be part of that proposal system. They're going to want to verify if you have that requirement for CMMC for a level 2. They're going to want to know that you have a certification, that you've been certified to that particular level. There is a part of that where annually you need to keep that updated. You can't do it once and walk away from it. Even though the certificate is good for 3 years, on an annual basis, you need to review your system and make sure that everything is up to speed, up to date. So once again, they want to make sure none of that information is false. They have the False Claims Act that they have that adds teeth to that, that you can be prosecuted if you falsify the information that you put in that SPRS database, and if you incorrectly identify any of the controls that you're meeting. So once again, they want to make sure that the information that's put in there is correct, whether it is for a level 1, level 2, whether it's a self-certification or your actual certification from the C3PAO. One of the things, maybe a tip that you want to consider is there's a lot of requirements here. There's about 320 assessment objectives. So you might want to break it up quarterly, reviewing it. Once again, we mentioned that it's an annual review that you have to test on an annual basis. You have to update your SPRS database. that you looked at everything, that it's up to date. You might want to break that up quarterly and take chunks of it and assign various individuals to be responsible for sections instead of trying to rush at the end of the year and do all of your assessment and reviewing at that time, because it's massive. There's a lot to overview. And then really, do you want to wait till the end of the year to know that there's something incorrect? The value of doing it maybe quarterly is that you can identify things early on and make those adjustments as needed.
Sounds a lot like the path we recommend for maintaining ISO systems. Right?
Absolutely.
Yes, it does.
Exactly.
Continual review. So, okay. So once we've established what CMMC law means, we've done that, all right? But there's still a lot of confusion in the field. I've heard confusion from my customers. So Scott, what's the biggest misconception that you're hearing from contractors about when and how compliance really applies?
Yeah, it's time to clear up the fog and get clear, because up until now, we've been saying, well, we think it's going to be this, and then things would change, or you'd hear something different. But now we have it all written out for us, so we can put to bed some of these rumors, if you will, right? So one is that a lot of people understand that CMMC is required when the contract is awarded, which is true. But keep in mind that during the proposal process, the contracting officer is going to look in the SPRS database at your status, and they're going to determine whether or not you're eligible to proceed in the bidding process. So you need to back that up and plan your certification before your bid submission, so that you don't throw up red flags and find that you're not eligible to proceed even through the bidding process. So you've got to watch your contracts carefully, and especially when, I don't know, late breaking contracts drop, and there's only a few weeks or less to get a proposal out. That's not the time to then say, oh no, now we have to get certified. You're not going to get certified. So it's a lengthy process to prepare for certification and get yourself certified. So you've got to, now's the time to go do it. I mean, it's not when the contract comes out. You're already going to be behind when that happens. So if you're committed to serving the Defense Department and taking these contracts as a prime or a subcontractor, you need to get after it and get this done so that you get all the boxes checked and you're ready to go. Second one is, some people believe that level 1 is an optional thing. Like, say you don't have it CUI. So you say, okay, level 2, not for me, the big one, right? The big certification. Well, self-attesting to the 17 practices of level 1, it's still required. If you're level 2 certified, you don't have to worry about it because you already have all that covered. But if you're not going to do that, any other contract that you might pursue that has FCI involved, which is all of them, needs a self-attestation, annual self-attestation annually for that you meet all the level 1 requirements. And that affirming official that Rick mentioned puts their name on it, their signature, and guess who's liable for a false claim if in fact you're not meeting those requirements and it's found out later. So you still have to take it seriously. Maybe another one I'll mention is that CMMC replaces NIST 800-171. Not true. CMMC uses NIST 800-171 as to spell out the requirements, the technical requirements for certification. CMMC doesn't talk about the technical requirements. That's NIST. It talks about how do you get certified and what are the requirements to get certified, and how do you bid on a contract, and how do you keep your scores updated and all that logistical things. So they work hand in hand. There's nothing really replaces that. So, and I guess last thing is, this isn't a once and done thing. You might, be getting certified because you have a big contract coming up, and you get yourself certified. But there's annual attestations, there's recertification every 3 years, and heaven forbid there's a breach while you're under contract, and there's an investigation and they determine you really didn't follow through on everything. There's liability. In fact, next month we're going to have an attorney. I'm going to be talking to an attorney about this liability piece. I think people should check that one out, because I think you want to know the risks to not really maintaining your security program. It's a big deal, and it's serious. Why? Because soldiers' lives are at risk. Always remember, it's not just the government being, persnickety here. It's that we're trying to protect our warfighters. That's it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Scott. That helps with the misconceptions. Let's move on to timing. Scott, how about you again? Can you help us break down the 4-phased approach that is going to unfold, and when will companies start seeing CMMC clauses appear in their contracts?
Yeah, could be next week. Just saying that. It could be. But here's the official rollout plan. And X, if you could put that up on the screen, we'll kind of go through that. So phase 1 really is where level 1 self-assessment and level 2 self-assessment begin for selected new awards and options. So this is the burn-in period. This is the getting started period here, okay? So they're saying they're not going to put full certification in contracts in year 1. I think we're going to see it. I think they're going to pull in and accelerate this. But according to the plan that's in 48 CFR, the first year is about self-attestation for level 1. So everybody has to be self-attested to level 1 until you're level 2 certified, right? So it kind of overlaps. But so this is the year to get compliant. This is the year to get compliant with level 1 and or level 2. Get it all in place. Even if you don't pull the trigger on the certification, get it all in place. Get yourself secure. Phase 2 would be the following year. And that would be where the third-party certifications become mandatory for contracts. Okay? Not all contracts, because they don't want to dump it on the whole industry all at once, because there aren't enough assessors to go around. So they got to, stage this out. But officially, the contracts can start saying certified is mandatory. Okay, that's phase 2. I'm not sure I have the years right on this slide, so I'm just going to make sure. Let me double check. Initial contracts, that should say 25. If you guys are taking notes, that should say 25. That's my fault. And phase 2, 26. And then we're into 27 in the full implementation phase. And that's when they'll introduce level 3 certification, which we don't talk a lot about. They're only expecting 2 or 3% of all DoD contractors to need level 3. It's very advanced. That's why we haven't talked a lot about it. And those companies that need level 3 are typically high-level technology companies anyway. So it's not something we've focused on, but it is coming as well. And that would be in phase 3. And then phase 4 is all contracts all the time. And Rick, did I get it right? I know I had the slide wrong here.
Yes, I think
that's
you
right.
got it right. Mhm.
Okay. All right, there we go. But all that to say, get started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No
All
matter
that
what.
to say,
Get started.
Get it
Get started.
done. Yeah.
All right. So once contractors understand the timeline, whatever it looks like, readiness becomes the next challenge. So Rick, if a company isn't fully ready yet, can they still compete? And what does conditional certification actually allow them to do?
Yes, a really good question, and something that needs to be understood. Let's start with the conditional status. That conditional status only applies to level 2 and level 3s. And it has to do with your certification process. Level 1, on the other hand, is not certifiable, if you will. It is a self-assessment. It's your basic cybersecurity safeguard. As Scott mentioned earlier, it involves about 17 of the 110 controls that are part of the level 2. The conditional part of that is allowing you to have a few misses in your assessment. Now, don't get overly excited about that. You still have to maintain a score of greater than 80. And it can only be those practices that have a value of 1. So if you remember the rating process, each practice or each control can have a value of 1, 3, or 5. So the ones are already the lesser critical practices. And once again, not all of the 1-pointers, if you will, can be taken, can be slightly missed. But it's conditional. You have 180 days in order to correct those little misses to bring your score up to 110. And after that 180 days, you have to have a reassessment there of those controls to make sure that they are in place moving forward to maintain your certification. So that's important to know. In reality, I say you really have to have all your controls in place. Don't bank on having a POAM item where what we're talking about is a plan of action and milestone to correct those particular misses. But once again, they are allowing a little bit there for you in case there's an issue that you might, and usually it's going to be documentation type things that you miss there. So once again, the level 2 is the one that is going to affect most individuals, and that's the one where you want to focus on and make sure that you're meeting all those particular controls.
Sure. Okay, thank you. All right, so now we know when enforcement begins. Let's now turn to who it impacts. So, Scott, under the new DFARS clauses, how do these changes affect prime contractors and the way that they manage compliance across their supply chain?
Yeah, so I think we've talked about this in months or years past in these monthly webinars, but prime contractors, those directly contracting with the government, so even if you're a small company, you can be a prime contractor. It's not really necessarily a size. It's kind of where you are in the position of the contracting tree, if you will. So prime contractors not only have to be certified themselves, and it's in their contract, they have to flow the requirement down to their suppliers. They hold their suppliers accountable. That's the way you want to think about that, okay? So the government is holding primes accountable to be certified and accountable to hold their suppliers accountable, who in turn hold their suppliers accountable, in turn hold their suppliers accountable, right? So primes, in order for them to be certified, have to prove that their suppliers are certified. They can't go to contract having maybe their house in order, but they've got some suppliers who are way out of line and not even starting to prepare. And they're going to receive CUI as part of the contract. Drawings are going to flow and this kind of stuff. And then the drawing's going to flow out to a supplier that's not even secure. It's not going to work, right? Not going to protect that information. So the whole ecosystem in that contract has to be certified. It's a huge lift for primes. Some of them are hundreds of suppliers, contractors in these contracts that have to be certified before the prime can get a contract. It's a lot at stake. So primes have been on the ball already a couple years ago, starting putting letters out, and even their own contracts starting to say, you've got to be compliant. Maybe you don't have to be certified yet, but we expect you to be compliant. And I'm not surprised if most of the people listening have seen those letters from a prime. So that's important. And they have to be able to track certifications and affirmation dates, certifications for level 2, affirmation for level 1 and level 2, but we won't go there. Okay? But I got to make sure their suppliers are toeing the line. And they have to have a mechanism to do that. So they'll have a database, and they'll have letters, and they'll have notifications and templates to follow all that. Why do they have to have their own system to track all that stuff? Because they do not have access to SPRS. SPRS is a government-only system. Only government employees can use SPRS, other than you can submit your scores. But to go in and search and to see what the status is, the primes will not be able to see it. So they have to have their own way of tracking. So if you work for several primes, you may find their methods are different. Different ways things are being tracked, the different ways you're getting notified, stuff like that. But the flow down is continuous. The contract language has to be copied out of the prime contractor, put into the subcontract, so that the subcontractor's on the hook as well. And then there's all this monitoring. So it's a lot to it, but don't be surprised if your primes ratchet up even more their expectation that you're getting prepared, you're fully compliant, you have a certification date on the calendar, if not being certified. I mean, they have got to push this forward, or they won't be able to get work from the government. That's the bottom line right there.
Okay. Yeah, that's a lot of responsibility for the primes. Let's talk about the supplier side, Rick. How in the world can small subcontractors stay competitive when the primes start requiring this proof of compliance?
Mm-hmm. Good question. Again, we say position yourself early. Really, you should be started already. And if you haven't started, you're probably behind your competition.
That's right.
So you want to make sure that you are working on your level 1 and level 2 status right now. It's the important time. If you haven't started, you want to get a jump start on that and start working on that. So before it actually is written into contracts, there probably still is a little bit of a delay before we start seeing a contract with the actual requirement in, as Scott mentioned earlier. So you need to get in there, get your requirements met, and start working on that today. And then ultimately you want to get that score entered into the SPRS database. It's really not enough just to put that score in the database. You need to have evidence that supports the score that you've just entered. Just putting that score in there doesn't make you compliant. And I've seen or heard of some contractors doing that very thing. Well, I have a score of 110. Well, do you have evidence that supports that? And that's going to be important to have that physical evidence. Start collecting that evidence. Things like policies, and it could be indexes or recent scans or logs, or there's a number of things that are required by the standard, by the requirements, that you need to start maintaining records and evidence that you're meeting these particular controls. One of the big things that you want to do is try to reduce your exposure. What do I mean by that? It's to keep your scope as small as possible, or your boundaries as small as possible, with relation to that CUI, that controlled unclassified information. The larger your boundaries, the bigger your network, the more controls that you have to put in place, the more liability, the more risk you have. So if you can reduce that scope, reduce those boundaries, in such a way that now my exposure is small, such as an example would be an enclave. Like we have a core vault where we limit that to a virtual machine in the AWS GovCloud. So we are limiting the scope. We're making those boundaries very short, so reducing our risk as we move forward. So once again, things like maintenance, ongoing maintenance needs to be done with all of your activity. So it's not over again, we're mentioning, it's not once and done. It is a continual activity that you need to keep on top of. And once again, updating your SPUR score. I've had a number of clients. They've entered their SPUR score. You know what? 2 years go by and they forget. The contracting officer says you're not qualified anymore. And they say, why? You forgot to update your SPUR score.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Rick. That was a good discussion about the supply chain. Let's take a step back a little bit and look at readiness overall. Scott, I know we have some data here. So based on the latest data, where do most contractors stand today in terms of actual preparedness?
Yeah, there was a survey of suppliers, a pretty comprehensive survey of suppliers in October this year. And really, they found it pretty scary. 1% fully ready, if not certified. I mean, even less than 1% are certified. There's only a few companies that have actually gotten certified. But it's a very small number of people who are fully ready and have confirmed that all the evidence is in place and all the practices are in place and all the policies are in place to be fully ready. The rest have some other things, they're at a different place, less than 100% prepared, down to hardly have done anything at all. And many are still reporting negative SPUR scores. There's the way they weight the controls on that template. You can have negative score, not a positive score. You need 110, but negative 200 and something if you don't do anything. So if you have a negative number in your SPUR score still, you're way behind. And you really need to pick up the pace. Or, as Rick suggested, narrow the scope. So, people might have said, let's just upgrade everything. Let's just put everything in scope. That way we don't have to worry about where we keep all the CUI and who has access, because we'll just be able to continue with business as usual kind of thing. It's an expensive way to do it if you don't need to do it. It's a hard way to do it if you don't need to do it. Narrow it down, limit the people, limit the computers, limit the systems that have access to those documents, or use an enclave that's all set up. You can get things done pretty quick and the costs come way down. But a lot of people are just stuck in the still planning, still working, still trying mode. But that'll be a problem. That will be a problem, shall we say.
Okay. So we've been focused a lot on certification, but staying compliant is, the real task, I think. So Rick, what are some of the biggest ongoing challenges that small businesses face when it comes to maintaining compliance once they're certified?
Well, that's, once again, a lot of good questions.
Yeah,
and things people need to know.
Yeah.
And once again, one of the biggest things is there is 320 assessment objectives that you have to maintain evidence for. So I would say one of the biggest things is maintaining that evidence for those 320 assessment objectives and making sure that on a day-to-day basis that we haven't changed anything, that we are still compliant to those assessment objectives. So it's kind of a gap analysis becomes a challenge for small companies. They may not have the expertise. They may not have the bandwidth to do that. But once again, that's a challenge, making sure that we stay compliant to those 320 objectives. Once again, just a reminder, there's 110 practices. Those practices then are broken down into assessment objectives, anywhere from a couple assessment objectives to maybe almost a dozen objectives associated with that particular control. So having evidence, keeping up with that can be a challenge. And we've talked about it in the past. Maybe you want to have someone that you that you engage in doing that for you, that they would maintain periodically, at least on an annual basis. But we talked about quarterly too, trying to stay on top of those. So make sure that you are staying on top of those things. And once again, you might want to have people that you want to assign that will follow up. You know, just don't leave it to whomever, someone. And that whole adage about someone will take care of it, nobody does. Put a name to it. Make somebody responsible for following up to making sure these things get done. Once again, shrinking your scope, not a bad idea if it works for your environment, for your industry, for your company. Maybe you don't have to bring your entire network into scope. Maybe you can get along with a narrowed scope, an enclave. There's many ways to narrow your scope and keep those boundaries as small as possible. And once again, we talked about our core vault. There's other solutions that narrow that as well, but we're particularly fond with our core vault solution, our enclave. So once again, don't forget that even though you get certified every 3 years, you still have to go through this on an annual basis, recorded in the SPURS database, showing evidence, because at any time somebody could ask you for that evidence from the DoD. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I know we had looked at that data that Scott was showing us. You know, it's clear a lot of contractors still have work to do. So, Rick, what are some practical steps that small businesses can take right now to move closer to full compliance?
Well, I think a couple things that you need to keep in mind is that you need to have leadership's backing in all this. You know, the adage, everything rises and falls on leadership. That is so true here. And so you want to make sure that you provide enough bandwidth, if you will. You know, you have your day-to-day stresses for production and so forth, but you need to make sure that leadership has provided enough bandwidth to keep on top of these things. So once again, maybe sometimes they call it a sponsorship for your organization, someone that's overseeing, making sure the resources basically are available. That's so important as you move forward. Another area that is so critical is documentation and keeping current with your documents. I think sometimes people forget to document and they don't make it formal. And once again, you want to formalize your document, make sure it's controlled, upkeeping it. One of the biggest challenges is as maybe some things change within your environment, you forget about going back and documenting it. It's like, well, I'll get that tomorrow. And tomorrow never comes. And now it's getting time for an assessment. You look at the documentation and it doesn't match what you're doing. And for many years of assessing, I know documents are important. Assessors or auditors, you know, are going to want you to do what you say you're doing, and they'll match that up. So if your document says you're doing X, Y, Z, you better be doing X, Y, Z, or you'll get dinged for that. The other thing is making staff aware of your CUI, how it flows within your organization. What are their responsibilities to protect that CUI if they come in contact with that. Not even only the CUI, but maybe people that are coming into your facility that could accidentally see CUI. What are their roles and responsibilities? And that comes through training. There needs to be some type of formal training for your employees so they are aware of, hey, we have this controlled all and classified information in our organization. I may not handle it, but I need to be aware of it. I need to know that it has to be protected. If I see somebody strange walking through the facility, who do I contact about that? So once again, staff awareness is so important here. And so I would say you need to incorporate that into your daily activities. It ought to become a routine. And just make it part of your daily routine, your environment, that you are aware of being responsible when it comes to controlling and managing that CUI.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. So we have talked about readiness and preparation, and we've also talked about maintaining compliance. Rick did that a bit, but Scott, there's a term called continuous compliance under this new rule. What's that about?
Well, it's about being liable at any time. In the event something were to occur and you couldn't prove that you were following the requirements at that time when the breach occurred, it opens up liability. And so, attacks and attempted attacks don't happen when you're ready. They happen when you're not ready, it seems, right? So you got to stay ready. You got to stay on the defensive constantly to be not only maintaining compliance, which is vitally important, but maintaining security of all that information. So, most of our customers also have management systems in place for things like ISO 9001, ISO 27001, AS 9100. So they're used to the routine, they're used to the discipline, they're used to the checks and balances, they're used to internal audits and training and documentation, all the pieces and parts. Well, if you think about CMMC in the same manner, you could set up a management system to keep track of compliance on a regular basis. So incorporate it into management review or set up a separate management review. Maybe it's a smaller group, that needs to participate. Set up an internal audit that's based around the 320, assessment objectives and check on yourselves quarterly, as Rick had talked about. Put your documentation in your document control system, like our core platform, hint, hint. But maintaining it in the same manner that you do any other management system, you can leverage what you've already learned and what you already have in place to maintain this level of compliance. And this level of compliance, frankly, is more strict. It's more strict than an ISO standard is. ISO standards, you can have nonconformances and corrective actions from your audits and stay certified. As long as they're not major, but...
And they're voluntary.
And they're voluntary, yeah.
Unlike these requirements.
Yeah, but these exactly. Being certified is voluntary,
yes.
Right? It could be a contract requirement, though, right? I suppose in that regard.
Yeah.
But this just carries so much more weight to it, and it comes directly from the government. So you just got to be aware of all of that. So using metrics, using corrective actions, using a risk register, all those are good things that you probably already have in place if you're already certified to another standard. Incident drills, it's a lot like other kinds of activities you do in different standards, different requirements. If you have a safety certification like ISO 45001, you already do safety drills. Okay, well, you do a security drill. That's part of the requirement of CMMC. So again, there's a lot of analogies that you can borrow and a lot of practices and procedures that you can leverage to make this as easier on yourself than just having to set up a chief babysitter to watch everything, right? You really want a system to watch over things, and that'll help.
Okay, so that's what continuous compliance looks like. But we know that companies can fall short. Rick, what are potential consequences if a contractor fails to maintain compliance or, heaven forbid, misrepresents their status?
Yeah, those are important things to keep in mind. We mentioned it a little earlier about the False Claims Act that was put into place to help protect CUI and put consequences or teeth to the compliance. It could be anywhere from issuing of fines. I suppose if it's really grievous, it could end up in jail time, which nobody wants to end up there. Definitely, it could cost you your contracts. So even if, and that's one of the important things about passing it on to your suppliers, because they could breach that requirement, causing you to lose your contract. That flow down is important. So you may have your act together, but if any of your suppliers don't, they could cost you your contract. So once again, you want to make sure that you don't provide any false statements, that your subcontractors don't provide false statements. So you want to do due diligence there so that False Claims Act does not get brought against you. I think everybody's heard of, at least in this industry, about the incident at Georgia Tech. And there was a settlement, a sizable settlement there. So we want to make sure that they take this serious, that it's not just a bunch of words. They are holding people accountable for the things that they're saying about their cybersecurity. The other thing that we want to remember too is that you want to protect your audit trails. If there happens to be a breach, there has to be a way, and you're required to provide information to go through and evaluate it, do a forensic activity on those things that took place and try to find out, where the breach happened, maybe who the actors were. Maybe it was internal, maybe external. But once again, you need to protect that information so that, God forbid, a breach happens, that an investigation can take place and that we can resolve that particular area. So once again, you want to make sure you have all the proper tools in place to provide that evidence, kind of like what we have in our core security suite. We have a lot of this information for tracking the activities, whether it's the SPURS database that we have for tracking your score to any of the logs that are being maintained. So those are important things that you want to have in place to help an investigation that goes on.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk. A lot of risk of being out of compliance. Scott, how should companies structure their internal monitoring, to make sure those annual affirmations make that, really easy and defensible if reviewed by the DoD or DOJ?
Yeah, it's having all that evidence on hand that Rick was talking about. I would say it boils down to having a cadence for doing what you need to do. So think about it. There's some things you want to do immediately if it occurs. There are some things you can do daily. Maybe at the end of the day you get caught up. Some things weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. But think about that regular routine that you want to establish, and that gives you the framework, if you will, for ensuring you're staying in compliance and you're staying secure. So quarterly compliance cycles of going through all the 320 assessment objectives, update your score on a regular basis. Make sure you keep a POAM in place so you can track things that are open and get them closed. using automation tools like our core security suite that Rick was talking about that just helps you collect information and track it and report on it and see gaps that inevitably will happen that you need to get closed. Have a calendar. Just have a master calendar that's shared maybe with everyone who's involved so that reminders can be there, and maybe set up automatic reminders in your calendar to alert people, hey, it's time to do things. So those are, blocking and tackling management approaches, but, leverage the things that you have in place and be that, have a compliance champion or a compliance custodian, if you will, and just said that person is going to be the inspector general for your company, making sure we're staying on top of it. We're staying on top of it. And just don't wait till, the end of the year or the night before an assessment to go and scramble and figure this out. You will not be successful because they look for track record. I think that's a fundamental principle here. That track record is vital for the assessor to be confident to put that stamp of approval on your company.
And I think, treating it like a financial audit is a really good idea.
I think that's a good way to think about it, Suzanne. Exactly right. Yep.
Make sure all your ducks are in a row.
Yep.
All right. I know we've been answering questions throughout the broadcast today, but we'll take a minute if there are any additional questions that you want to pose now. Okay. So let's recap today's key takeaways. CMMC is now law. The rollout starts now. The 4-phase timeline begins November 2025 and continues through 2028. Everyone in the supply chain is accountable. And unfortunately, readiness is low, but achievable. So start early, focus on scope control, and invest in sustainable processes and tooling. Certification is the beginning, not the end. At Core Business Solutions, we've seen how small businesses succeed with a structured approach. Solutions like the Core Vault, a secure enclave deployed in your own AWS GovCloud environment that helps contractors meet Level 2 requirements efficiently and helps sustain compliance year after year. If you need help, reach out to your local Apex Accelerator or MEP. They're here to support your journey. And if you need hands-on help, gap assessments, documentation templates, or a turnkey enclave, reach out to Core Business Solutions. If you'd like to learn more, visit the Core Business Solutions website or reach out to schedule a readiness consultation. Be sure to check out our website and YouTube channel for more CMMC information, and mark your calendar for our November webinar, CMMC Legal Implications, Avoiding Liability Risks. Thank you to everyone for joining us, and to Scott and Rick for sharing their expertise as always. And remember, CMMC isn't just about compliance, it's about protecting your ability to compete in the defense industry.